What's a ticking time bomb you believe will explode during your lifetime? Story 1. The high cost of housing, mortgage interest rates. I can't imagine being a young person today and trying to afford a $750K house. Answer. Just talked to my wife about this yesterday. We built our home in 2011 for $200K. A month or so ago, our neighbors who built in 2015, slightly smaller home, 2,300 square feet compared to 2,500 square feet, sold their home for $500K. The buyers massively overpaid, of course, as houses now are going for around $430, $450K, but still, over 2x in value in just over 10 years? No way that's real. We couldn't afford to live here if we weren't here already. Combine that to our 15-year refinance in 2020 at 1.99 interest rate. We are never moving anytime soon. Not until this house is paid off at least. I feel terrible for families just starting off. Everything is so inflated. Story 2. I'm afraid that a debt bubble is brewing. Auto foreclosures are climbing. Same with homes. Quite rapidly, too. July saw 13 increase from the year before in home foreclosures. This is in an already prohibitive market to enter. I think it's crazy, but I'm not an expert. Story 3. The subscription everything model becoming completely unsustainable for the average person. Software, entertainment, heated seats in a car, grocery delivery. Eventually, people's incomes just won't be able to handle 1,000 tiny monthly payments. Something's got to give. Story 4. The job market in the U.S. is collapsing. This could be AI. It could be corporate greed. It could be a lot of other things or a mix of things. But this feels different than other times because there is little awareness market correlation like in past recessions. We're not in a recession. Unless you're actively looking for a job, you probably don't understand how bad the job market is. Answer. Unless you're actively looking for a job, you probably don't understand how bad the job market is. This is so true. Here in Germany, the news still talks about there being a shortage of skilled workers and that this is a huge problem. The reality is that me and all my friends who graduated college in a technical field are unable to find a job after months of searching and hundreds of applications. Story 5. Hopefully Beetlejuice as a supernova. I'd really like to witness that. Edit. I understand the timeline aspect of this. Answer. Sorry to potentially burst your bubble, but there's very recent, good evidence that it is a binary star system with a smaller partner that we've just been unable to see. So much of its variability that we thought was because it was headed towards a collapse may have nothing to do with that. Here's a video from Anton Petrov about it. But hey, instead you got to see science discover yet another amazing new thing. Story 6. The education crisis. From hearing stories, students are expressing a lack of basic skills and common sense, which will definitely come back to bite them when they are adults. Current students will be very underprepared for life after school, and you just have to listen to teachers' stories for the world of hurt coming in 10 years. Answer. This. They also are so apathetic about failing knowing nothing. Nothing motivates kids anymore. Not positive reinforcement, not negative reinforcement. A lot of them just generally give up around 6th, 7th grade, and their parents let them because they're too tired from late-stage capitalism or too jaded by having boundaries as a child, which they needed. There are still good parents and still good kids, but no child left behind, needing both parents to work to keep the family afloat, and inclusion without support, eliminate general education. So much energy goes into the few awful, and yes, they're awful. Students and the ones who are average excelling have their needs ignored. The current U.S. government rewarding stupidity, herd thinking, and inflated sense of self isn't quite helping either. Story 7. Subprime car market. The volume of debt in car finance is huge, and depressed resale values of cars coming off lease is far below what was expected. The Porsche Taycan is a perfect example of this. And now Porsche has a chunky black hole in its books because it cannot get book value for these cars. Story 8. The whole mass surveillance legal id for everything. Protecting the children. Yeah, right. Bullshit that is currently going on everywhere. And mega corporations, Meta, Google, collecting every bit of data they can. People will either massively push back or privacy will completely die. Story 9. Car prices in the United States. Eventually, we will start to see poorer Americans turn towards motorcycles as a daily driver because we just can't afford cars anymore. Think Vietnam. Story 10. There is a lot of anger out there. When I was a kid growing up, or even as a young adult, I didn't see this type of anger where people are so angry that they really could hurt someone over a minor incident. Things that are said, things that people have actually done, indicates that this anger is on the rise. The anger is not from one specific issue, but several different issues. Most of the time, it's been mostly talk, little action, but I fear that those who are so angry are going to commit acts of violence against other people who they see as the enemy. The type of person is very dangerous to anyone they come into contact with. Answer: that was mine too. People don't talk about it, but a lot of people are so angry and ready to mistreat people over the slightest inconvenience. I've noticed it more since I was young. People at work are just assholes to be assholes. I feel like a burden every time I walk into any business. People online just dislike on each other for no reason. People they'd likely be friends with if they met in person. I didn't realize it was a problem until I realized I was part of the problem. It's truly bizarre. I feel as if it's social media and maybe the politicization of literally everything. Story 11. I believe as the gap between the haves and have-nots continue to widen, we are heading towards some potentially violent times, and we are already seeing it. Juggings are increasing tremendously. How many celebrities' athletes' homes are broken into while they are out of town? The smash and grabs, or the mob smash and grabs, with social media enable groups or mobs of people to quickly come together. It seems likely that this behavior only increases, and the mobs will only get bigger, which could overwhelm any law enforcement. Answer: it's so bad that even investment firms are saying it in public reports. Economic and political history suggests that the imbalances along the social axes of division we are witnessing are typically only solved through some type of hard medicine, be it recession, austerity, inflation, debt monetization, wealth redistribution, and tax hikes. But building confidence that the U.S. has a solution at hand is not obvious, given extreme public division and limited evidence of broad political will. Without some material change to existing policies, debt and deficits will continue to grow, and the central bank will likely have no choice but to monetize those debts. Under that scenario, real U.S. economic growth gets crushed under the weight of high real debt cost, while political stability continues to suffer. In this way, the trend ultimately ceases to be friendly and instead becomes undermining. When prosperity is no longer distributed or shared with the majority of the population, systems and the markets that reflect they tend to break. Similarly, for citizens and policymakers, misunderstanding what underpins our current position of strength risks destabilizing overreach and policy mistakes. Most simplistically, not only do these extremes suggest a world fracturing between those who are inflation and rate sensitive and those who are not, but the schisms effectively birthing two distinct economies, for which one set of fiscal and monetary responses may no longer be ideal, complicating the already difficult job of setting policy. Division is not only contributing to confusion about how to interpret economic data, this is obscuring experience differentials between the lowest and highest wealth cohorts, but it is also driving the country's political instability. A case in point is that lower interest rates may be needed for 2/3 of the households, small businesses and regional banks, but not for those who are driving 2/3 of consumption. With no single policy solution producing the optimal outcome, policymakers are forced to choose from what they perceive as the lesser of evils, leaving markets to deduce the trade-offs, with the risk of exacerbating the divide between economic winners and losers. Story 12. Major Pacific Northwest earthquake causing loss in coastline elevation and significant flooding changes to the coast, although I truly hope not. Story 13. Biological terrorism created by a crazed zealot using gene editing equipment ordered off the internet. Answer: Kurzgesagt had about this a while back. Basically, their point was that the barrier to entry for creating bioweapons will move from nation-states spending billions of dollars to dude in his basement using AI and CRISPR. It's something that isn't often spoken about in public, but it could be hugely problematic. Look how much chaos and societal impact COVID had. Now imagine multiple viruses with 20-fold the lethality being released constantly. Story 14. There are so many horrible tragedies on their way that are too late to steer away from. One towers above the rest as far as the humanitarian crisis it's going to cause. India is getting too hot to survive in for humans. No country is going to easily be able to absorb the huge numbers of people escaping the inhospitable areas. It's going to be really, really bad. To put this into context, if the trend of increasing air conditioning use continues at the current rate, India will be using more electricity to power just air conditioners than all the electricity the continent of Africa uses in a year for everything. By 2050, that's not that far away. Answer. Growing up in the 90s, aughts, we were always told about China's unassailably large population, how, even with a one-child policy, they were still, by a margin, the most populous nation on the planet. So imagine the mental whiplash when learning that in 2023, India overtook China as the most populated country on the planet. And now I'm finding out that their staggering population used such massive quantities of energy on air conditioning? I'm afraid to even ask, but is there even a suggestion of a solution to this problem coming from the Indian government or its people? Or is it just quietly being ignored for as long as the lights stay on? Story 15. Kessler syndrome. It's basically a runaway effect of debris in orbit. The more debris, the more likely for catastrophic collisions causing more debris, and that debris causing more collisions. All until space becomes inaccessible due to billions of untrackable pieces of metal hurtling around the planet at tens of thousands of miles an hour. Answer. This is less of a problem than people make it out to be, since this would only be happening in low Earth orbit. The majority of the material would steadily deorbit over the next few decades due to the slight amount of air that is up there. So it would be clean enough again after a few decades. Sure, we'd lose access to low Earth orbit and potentially higher orbits depending on how bad it is, but our satellites in higher orbits will continue functioning and will eventually be able to return. Story 16. The last time inequality was this bad across the West, the Gilded Age, led to repeated revolutions and wars. Eventually, the rich figured out that paying tax to fund welfare and income redistribution was a better option than hanging off lampposts. They forget these lessons, and here we are again. So I predict we will witness an explosion in the violence inherent in the system. Story 17. Mass heat deaths, drought, and then survival migration from those areas. If people think migrants are a problem now, 20 years from now it will be like that zombie movie where they are crawling over the corpses below them to get into the compound. And they aren't after your stuff or your jobs. They are after a climate that is 5 degrees cooler, at least, because wet bulb temps are driving them to travel. Answer. I'm awaiting the next El Niño with dread, since that is likely to be the point where we see the first widespread mass disasters in Western nations. Not that the situation with drought, wildfires, sea level rise, increased flooding, famine are likely to be any less deadly for those affected, especially those countries already on the edge of survivability. The next 25 years are likely to be a nightmare for the majority of the world. I hope I'm wrong, that my interpretation of the available evidence is on the pessimistic side. However, I'm through with copium. Story 18. Russia's thawing tundra will release enough methane to eliminate quite a few people and drive even more wars for land by its leaders. China's current lack of water. They've got 20 of the world's population and less than 10 of its water, with much of it not potable and lots of it being contaminated. 13 of its territory is not arable, and much of it mountainous, rocky, desert, or not desirable, easily livable. They're screwed, so the rest of us soon will be too, by climate refugees, land grabs, and wars over fishing, crops, and livestock. Answer. Just to piggyback on here because global warming was my answer. The planet is now hotter than any time in the last 125,000 years, warming at a rate dozens of times faster than natural rates of global warming. Even the great dying that eliminate more than 90 of life on Earth happen much slower than current rates of warming. This is an out-of-control planetary scale experiment with the chemical and thermal properties of the atmosphere and oceans. There's no control, no safety plan. It's insane how reckless we are being. Story 19. One that has been bothering me for a long time is the fear of when the next big solar flare or coronal mass ejection will hit. If one as powerful as the Carrington event, we might better say goodbye to basically all technology and power for at least a few months to a few years. And to be honest, we are due for a big one anytime soon. Here's a great episode about what might happen from the Y-Files. Answer. And to be honest, we are due for a big one anytime soon. That's not how probabilistically determined events work. For an oversimplified example, say an event has a 50% chance of occurring once every 10 years and no other variables are involved. The chance of it happening in the 365 days immediately after its last occurrence is exactly the same as the chance of it happening in the 365 days that occurs after 19 years of nothing happening. There's no build-up or due to happen. involved. Story 20. Higher education. I'm not against universities, but in the last 30 years, it has gone from something aspirational and meaningful to a corporate money grab and worthless. You're already seeing graduates going into entry-level positions. The cost of higher education has made this impossible for millions, and will pay for it one way or another eventually. Story 21. At this point, I think an easier to answer question is what isn't a ticking time bomb that will explode in my lifetime? Story 22. Social Security. I'm never going to see that money. It's pretty much legal theft at this point for anyone under 50. Story 23. Anything you can think of seems to be going off at more or less the same time in the present. I was born in 1991. Barely got to the point I am relatively successful personally and professionally, and instead of keeping this positive trend, all kind of external bullshit turns up. Pandemic, war, economic crisis, nuclear threats, social collapse, all kind of dumb conflicts, climate changes, etc. And all of this is led by assholes in their 70s minimum. Trump, Putin, Xi, Erdogan, Orban, Khamenei, Netanyahu, etc., which apparently don't have anything better to do with their lives. At this point, there isn't really a time bomb that I expect not to blow during my lifetime. Story 24. The housing market bubble in the U.S. House prices are through the roof. If 2008 was any indication, there will be massive turmoil once the bubble pops. Answer. The housing market bubble in the U.S. House prices are through the roof. If 2008 was any indication, there will be massive turmoil once the bubble pops. But it's not the same situation. The housing crisis in 2008 happened because the subprime loans were, essentially, fraudulent. People were financing multiple homes on easy credit because no one was looking under the sheets. The housing crisis now is a direct reaction to quarantine. Look at this chart for the price of construction materials. The actual cost to build an actual home has skyrocketed. It's not just paper value propped up by shoot loans. We basically shut down all home construction for at least 6 months, if not a year. And we can't get ahead of it because there's shortages. Things have leveled off, but we have about a year's worth of home construction to make up for it. If you want to quote-unquote blame anyone, I guess blame the people who shut down the ports and closed down the factories. But that means you're essentially against everything we did during the pandemic to stop the spread. There's no easy solution, then or now. And this is a global, international crisis, at least in the West. So whatever reason you think it is, institutional investors, evil landlords, mustache-twirling Airbnb owners, etc., isn't a reason unless that reason also exists in all of North America, Europe, and Oceania. I don't know what the solution is except to fast-track more housing development, which, thanks to various regulations, is hard to do. This is just cold, hard supply and demand. This isn't the shell game that 2008 was. Story 25. If things continue the way they are, we will very soon have a global water crisis on our hands. Soon after, agriculture could become impossible, or almost such in many parts of the world. We are absolutely not prepared for what's coming our way, and it's going to hit the world like a speeding train. Story 26. Canadian housing market. I know it's been like this for almost 30 years now, but it really does feel like we're at a breaking point. I'm not really sure if the idea of that gives me hope, as it's frankly the only reasonable way for me to ever own a home in my lifetime, or fills me with dread as our GDP is basically propped by real estate. Either way, it's going to be one hell of an explosion. Story 27. The critical energy infrastructure hub in Portland, Oregon, is essentially a primed mega disaster, being today ready to succumb to the effects of a large earthquake off the Oregon coast. It is a massive facility for agricultural and petrochemical transfer and storage. Many of the tanks are not up to current seismic code, and the facility itself is built on alluvial soils which will liquefy with enough sustained shaking. The combined spill chemicals will form toxic and flammable clouds, and human loss would be very extensive as traffic lanes are congested and the river burns. Solutions are difficult as stakeholders are diverse and many, with blame enough to go around for not addressing the problem before now. Story 28. It has massive inertia, and it takes a while, but it starts moving. And this one guy begins jogging with the huge aircraft. Our planet's climate has massive inertia. It's been resisting all these changes we've been making, but it's starting to move. And unless it's balanced out, it will start to speed up. Sir David Attenborough made a whole documentary on it. He's seen the world over 70 years doing nature series and literally has witnessed the changes occurring. Our planet will be dramatically altered within this century if we don't really start doing things differently. Answer: it's quite frustrating to scroll so far down in this thread to find the one thing that is 100% certain that people who will be alive in the next 20 years will experience. Wet bulb events are locked in, and some of the most populated areas on the planet will soon become uninhabitable. This isn't an issue of air conditioning. It's about the local ecosystem collapsing under heat while people huddle in AC hoping the grid doesn't fail. This will happen. It's only a matter of time, and the measures necessary to reverse course is the immediate cessation of burning fossil fuels and entire restructuring of the global industrial output to carbon capture. Even that would only slow the trajectory after the worst damage has been caused because of the inertia of the system. We are all going to see this in the next decade, not a century from now. Story 29. Data rights. It's all-encompassing, and as Americans, we basically have zero. Most of the rights we have come from Europe. You don't even own your iPhone you're reading this on. Legally, read the contracts, LMAO. Story 30. If other people near 30 or younger cannot afford a house, what will we buy? RVs? Tiny homes? Rent apartments till we die? Homeless? This will be a crisis. Story 31. 401k contributions allowed to bet on cryptocurrency and private equity. Trillions of dollars tied to people's retirement accounts will enter high volatility markets. Story 32. Our national debt. As it appears, most current politicians are using their positions for personal gain, knowing that they'll be dead or out of office when the real shit hits the fan. Story 33. Endgame capitalism, which is fast approaching. 20th century was the golden age of capitalism, but the system itself is not self-correcting or sustainable like everyone claims. It eventually devolves into what we're heading towards, a complete collapse. The system exponentially feeds the top. At the end stages, 100 people will own everything, with a small, wealthy minority behind, while the rest will be struggling to survive. We're not there yet, but we're not too far either. People will start to revolt, and there will be an irreversible class war. Answer: the problem with this hypothesis is the many places where this is already the norm, but people don't or can't rise up. Brazil, Russia, and much of the Middle East are societies where a tiny fraction have everything and most people have nothing. Yet they continue year after year, decade after decade. The rise of AI and robotics will be the final victory of capital over humanity, and the rich will leave us all to starve in a ditch. Story 34. It's more of a case of which of the many time bombs will go off first and then exacerbate the others. TBH. Story 35. I think that there will be a climate change event that will make all the deniers go, oh shoot. Unfortunately, it will involve the passing of 100,000s of people, but it will be undeniably down to climate change. Then everyone will be up in arms to do something, but by then it will be too late. Story 36. All the money being investing into AI companies before their product has even been thought of is just like the .com growth before the bubble burst. The bomb will go off and big tech will clean up the pieces. Story 37. Student loans. Way too many people taking too much debt to earn degrees that pay too little. All that money going to schools that charge way too much for tuition to fund the salaries of professors and administrators that get paid way too much. Unless reforms happen, the American upper education system is going to enter a passing spiral. Story 38. The internet is both amazing and horrifying. It will end up destroying humankind somehow, probably through the full destruction of social cohesion, ironically. Story 39. Most of Gen Alpha already can't read or pay attention. I hope that their parents think that giving their children technology to shut them up was worth it. Story 40. The disappearing middle class. Only 50 years ago, a single-income family was able to get a house, a car, etc. Now everyone is working multiple jobs and still working paycheck to paycheck. People are going to get sick of this, and the 99 will go after the 1. Story 41. Late-stage capitalism. Some people call it end-stage capitalism. It goes by many names. The idea is that this pattern we're seeing with wealth inequality isn't just a short-term problem. This is a long-term problem baked into the very idea of capitalism. So long as capital, aka money, earns a higher return than labor, wealth inequality is going to continue to skyrocket. We're nearing the end of what capitalism can give us as a civilization. It's done a hell of a good job getting us to this point, but the whole system is woefully inefficient for the centuries to come. We're on the cusp of cheap, renewable energy, AI, and the kind of automation that is going to produce a disgusting amount of wealth. There will be shanty towns in America and massive unemployment on par with the Great Depression before things get any better. I hope people remember to bring their pitchforks because the people are going to have their day in the sun once again. TBH, I doubt a whole lot of people in France realized their whole world was about to collapse as the French Revolution began. A year or two later, there were kings and queens getting guillotined in the public square. Shoot can get really crazy when massive amounts of people hit a tipping point. Story 42. Water scarcity in many regions. Militarized fascism. I believe we will see a broader military conflict in the next 10 years. Likely U.S. military intervention in Mexico. Many more AI layoffs and general social cannibalism. Story 43. I believe we are one major event away from there being another civil war, civil unrest here in the UK. The tension has been growing for years now and feels like it could all kick off at any given moment. Answer. The media and certain politicians are desperate for that to be the case, certainly. But the idea of a full-on civil war is just laughable. It's like those twits plastering everywhere in flags at the moment, clearly hoping for councils to start taking them down so they can scream how they're being oppressed. But most people seem to just be rolling their eyes and going about their day, or assuming they're supporting England in the rugby, and councils seem mostly not to be falling for the bait. I saw a screenshot of the Daily Mail earlier of a picture which was captioned, "A crowd display flags while police look on." The picture showed two people with flags and another couple standing nearby who may have been with the flag wavers or may have just been passing by. Even the biggest demonstrations over the weekend seem to have been 20 or 30 people. That's not to say there isn't genuine anger at deprivation in a lot of places, which for the moment the press barons are finding it convenient to direct towards refugees. And I dare say there will be some flare-ups like last year. But civil war? Pull the other one. Story 44. I believe at some point within my lifetime we are going to go down one of two routes. A Bell Riots situation, where we actually rise up against the ultra-rich and corporations trying to take everything over, turn everyone against each other, and push us into the dirt. Or we roll over and start taking full control of countries. There's already multiple countries where corporations have far too much power over politics. Story 45. Microplastics will eventually lead to some irreversible health issues as it keeps collecting in our bodies. Probably brain or reproductive related is my guess. Story 46. Miyake event, or even possibly a Carrington. But our digital and electric-reliant society isn't ready for the type of solar events we have ample evidence have happened in the not-too-distant past, and will inevitably happen again. Story 47. I think we are closing in on this one faster than anything else I saw mentioned, but societal nihilism, the complete breakdown of the social contract, has resulted in generational suicidality. We have seen this expressed across cultures, across nations, and across the globe in a lot of different ways. Whether it is the hobo movement, the lie-flat movement, the hikikomori subclass, the men going their own way movement, the van life movement, etc. These are all expressions of grief and rejection by portions of society who feel alienated, isolated, and with no way integrate meaningfully into the world. It should be noted that this is merely a first-wave effect. These are people who are cognizant enough to recognize that they are a burden and simply don't want to cause anyone else to suffer. As such, they simply withdraw from participating in life at all. But there are more than one wave of social outcasts. Not everyone is going to just lay down and die. After a critical mass is reached, wave 2 of this movement is going to transpire. I would argue we are seeing the foundation of this wave crop up now. Flash mobs, gangs, cartels, lightly organized resistance, militias, etc. These people are also outcast by society, but aren't going to just sit back and take it. They can, do, and will do what they must to make it. If that means assault, takedown, robbery, terrorism, etc., then so be it. And after that wave goes, then comes the scariest ones of all, the maniacs, the psychopathic savants. These are the people who decide that humanity isn't worth saving. These are your passing dealers, your tyrants, your revolutionary guards, your mad scientists and mass murderers. These are the people who are so rejected by society that they see society and congregation itself as the enemy. The poisoners, the bombers, the genociders, the torturers, the religious sycophants. They don't just take what they need, they revel in human misery and suffering. They become convinced that it is part of the human condition, that it is owed to all things living, and that they must distribute that suffering without mercy. The thing about societal nihilism is that once it really gets rolling, it takes generations to slow it down. It's like a freight train, easy to get going, takes a while to ramp up, but very, very difficult to stop once it has momentum. People lose faith in humans on a basic level, which makes communication, cooperation, and collaboration nearly impossible. This looks like lots of small-scale disputes. Think Greek city-states or Mongolian tribes, or Japanese clans, Norse tribes, etc., that eventually boil over into bigger and bigger clashes until the wolves come out. There are no innocents in these time periods. There are no victims, just survivors. It breaks down to me and mine versus the world. And historically speaking, it is the worst outcome for humanity and has been every single time it has happened. The most well-understood example of this is quite literally called the Dark Ages, and society is believed to have been set back hundreds of years from the loss of knowledge and progress during that time period. I feel like we're speeding right towards a new Dark Age, except this one is going to be 20x worse because there are more of us, less resources, more advanced eliminate techniques and technology. There's a reason all the rich people are building bunkers. Story 48. The Competence Crisis. A new generation is coming that has been raised on TikToks that has no attention span or creative instincts, as they haven't experienced thinking for themselves. Story 49. People are becoming incredibly stupid, and they know nothing of the past history. Add to this the raw aggression and willingness to beat someone to passing because they didn't use their turn signal at a stoplight. The next 50 years, with AI contributing to our idiocy, the elites of the world will become ever more powerful and rich as they throw the stupid people a few loaves of bread and promise them football and masked singers on TV. Story 50. Trump and MAGA overthrow our democracy, make future elections like those that re-elect Putin regularly, and begin sending political opponents to the same camps they are building for illegals, using a 60,000-strong goon squad they call ICE. Story 51. And the great tragedy of this is that people who authentically had underlying conditions that made COVID-19 very scary for them are still living in a pandemic, while the rest of us have moved on. But now, I think the next time there's a major microbial viral crisis, we're going to do precisely nothing. And we may not know what is happening because our reporting systems have been intentionally crippled. All because of the failure to have a truth and reconciliation about how we all felt and acted and what really worked and didn't. And that includes both what worked or didn't in the sense of what mechanically limits disease spread, but also what actually makes sense given what we can reasonably expect in terms of human behavior and the economic, logistical, social systems we've constructed, and the degree to which it needs people to go out and share air with one another in order to keep everyone fed and supplied with toilet paper. Story 52. Healthcare. As a doctor, I wouldn't tell anyone to go into medicine. Medicaid getting cut. Small rural hospitals that are already struggling will be going under. Then larger hospitals will go or sell out until all you're left with is big hospital systems with disgruntled physicians, or only those seeking to work for the smallest dollar. The smartest students will see the skyrocketing debt load, that's now going to be part private, declining reimbursements, loss of private practice model, and rising large malpractice settlements, and nope, out of there. Story 53. Trump will refuse to give up power when his term ends, and he will officially establish himself as dictator with the support of his maggots. Story 54. America. With all of the red versus blue, Republican versus Democrat, and Trump versus the rest of the civilized world, the once mighty US of A is like a poisonous snake eating its own tail. The dictatorship is coming, and if the American people don't wake up, there will be one hell of an explosion, or implosion, and all that will be left are the billionaires chasing the sacred dollar. It's already started. Story 55. The amount of surveillance. Maybe I'm paranoid, but I don't like all these cameras everywhere, speed cameras, etc. I think doorbell cams are necessary, but all of this facial recognition, while not new tech, makes me very uncomfortable. But not just cameras either. You're always being tracked via your phone, your car, etc. Story 56. That funding supported more than 180 outbreak investigations and responses in 22 countries and helped build the capacities of over 160 laboratories in testing, biosafety, quality assurance, and workforce development. Specifically, funding was targeted to monitoring and responding to New World screwworm, preventing the spread of the disease to the U.S. I am so concerned that we are about to see a massive breakdown in our government's ability to actually run the biggest economy and most powerful military in the world. Story 57. Antibiotic-resistant diseases. People are too stupid to take the entire course of pills once they feel better. It has been getting worse, and that's not changing. Story 58. Global warming. The broken healthcare system. Whatever the fudge is happening between Israel and Palestine, which makes me just sick to my stomach. Story 59. The AI and quantum computing problem we're about to come to. Once hackers start using quantum computing and pair it with decent AI, it's game over. Cybersecurity will need to match that power. It'll become a digital arms race that destroys the world as we race to generate enough electricity to power and draw enough fresh water to cool the data centers. Answer. The AI and quantum computing problem we're about to come to. Once hackers start using quantum computing and pair it with decent AI, it's game over. Cybersecurity will need to match that power. Quantum computing is useful for breaking specific classes of encryption. In particular, encryption based on the discrete log and factoring, mainly through Shor's algorithm and variants thereof. But in response to that, we're already in the process of switching away from systems which are vulnerable to that, like RSA, to things like lattice-based cryptography, which is believed to be not vulnerable to quantum attacks. We'll have switched over so this isn't a problem well before quantum computers can scale up enough to attack substantially sized keys. There's really more of a worry that we have strong evidence that the NSA and other powerful actors are engaging in what has been called store now, decrypt later, where they store large amounts of the encrypted internet now with the expectation that they will be able to go and decrypt parts of it later. Story 60. Mass immigration. It's just going to pass the pension issue and declining birth rate problem to future generations. It's exacerbating housing issues. It's causing conflict across the world. Whether you like the idea of it or not, it's going to hit an inflection point. Story 61. Fresh wash crisis on planet Earth. We're going to see serious suffering and greed when it comes to fresh, drinkable water. Story 62. Greed in everything. Money, status, you name it. The "I want more tomorrow than today" feeling has a cascade effect and is detrimental to the civilization as it is. Story 63. A major earthquake in Boston, Massachusetts, USA. They got a 5.9 in 1755. It's not impossible to get another one. The thing is, the majority of what is now Boston used to just be ocean, but has since been filled in by dumping dirt into the ocean to create new land. A big enough earthquake could liquefy that loose fill and make a significant chunk of Boston slip into the ocean. Story 64. Civil war in the United States. Pension crises in multiple countries. War for the Arctic. Creation of mirror life. Autonomous. Eliminate machines. Story 65. The U.S. will most probably know a big crisis like in the 30s. Everything is aligned for it. The billionaires are in commands with Trump. Workers' right is growing back. Debt is skyrocketing. Inflation is real. Story 66. Literally the hundreds of unexploded WW2 bombs still buried beneath my home city. All that is stopping them from going up are cracked glass files and rotted cellulose paper. It's only a question of time until the first ones start just blowing up by themselves. Story 67. America in general. This country is going to be real fudge soon. I'm just sad I've got to be around to witness it. Story 68. Vaccine resistance in misinformation bringing back incredibly dangerous disease. I am a pediatrician with about 20 years left in my career, and there's a chance I will see polio, tetanus, bacterial meningitis, hemophilus, etc. Amazing that we had it solved, and now we're going backwards. Story 69. The federal debt. It's growing too fast and this admin is too unstable that they could do things which may make folks think twice about buying federal debt. Story 70. Social Security running out. I'll get reduced benefits, or who knows when it'll run out even after paying into it for decades. Story 71. A MMORPG so addictive it will plague the youth. AI-based quest lines, character interactions, world building. It's coming. I can feel it, and I welcome it. Story 72. Dementia crisis. We're talking about a generation of individuals that spend hours on their phone, sleep less, party harder, suffer from inorganic stress on a more constant basis. We're all screwed, guys. Story 73. Capitalism funneling money upwards. We're long overdue for a peasant revolt, and at least in the U.S., we're reiterating certain events that led to revolution in terms of tariffs. Story 74. The collapse from the climate change. Maybe not within my lifetime, but likely in the next 100, 200 years. So some who are alive right now might see it. The ice caps and glaciers will melt. The sea level will rise 200 feet. All coastal cities will be submerged. Deserts will expand. Regions will be uninhabitable due to the high heat. Severe storms will become more frequent and even more severe. All modern ports will be underwater. The industries will collapse. Trade will come to a halt. A massive refugee crisis will come about as people try to find new homes. Story 75. Fertilizer scarcity. The industrial production of fertilizer depends on several non-renewable resources. As those input resources become increasingly more expensive to extract, the cost of fertilizer will also become more expensive. Eventually, governments will have no choice but to subsidize these fertilizer costs for farmers to keep food affordable. But the cost of fertilizer will still continue to rise, and countries will increasingly restrict food exports to protect their own food supply. I suspect this will cause a mass starvation event somewhere in the world within my lifetime. Story 76. Water. Everyone talks about oil and gas, but freshwater shortages are already here in some places. I think within our lifetime, water rights and access are going to be one of the biggest global conflicts. Story 77. My bladder and bowels. I'm fairly confident that incontinence is inevitable and will present itself in a multiplicity of explosions. Story 78. Climate change. The signs are all there. They've all but been ignored by people that could have done something about it. I think we're past the point of no return, and it's going to start accelerating over the next few years, and then we're royally fudge. Story 79. Lack of sleep for almost 15 years will result in deterioration of my brain. Been a stimfag for that long. Still am. Will probably have to euthanize myself to not make anyone take care of me in that state. There were years when I slept only half the nights. This year, for example. Story 80. Honestly, pick your poison between climate change, new tech, economic disparity, etc. We're already making dystopian fiction seem tame. Story 81. Class war in U.S. I'm honestly surprised there have only been 2 CEOs eliminate. United Healthcare and Wesley LePatner, CEO of Blackstone Real Estate Income Trust. Story 82. The SS Richard Montgomery, a WW2 cargo ship in the Thames estuary with 1,400 tons of explosives aboard. Story 83. Honestly, the Internet. AI is working to devour all online information and make the Internet unusable. I want to go back to the before times. Story 84. Es horrible, y las autoridades locales, provinciales y el gobierno no mueven ni un dedo por cumplir con los programas de limpieza y repoblación que son su responsabilidad. Se quedan los dineros y somos nosotros, la gente de a pie, quien tiene que recoger la basura, plantar boles y llevarse la broza. Pa' colmo de males, ahora hay leyes que te prohíben sanear los boles, quitarles ramas muertas y la suciedad, talar los boles muertos, curarles enfermedades. Y así el monte es muy proclive a quemarse, que es lo que a muchos políticos les interesa para construir casas y chalets, como su dolo Trump quiere hacer en Gaza. Este nivel de maldad y desvergüenza es pa' matarlos ya, y la gente no espabila todavía. Siguen votando y protegiendo a estos psicópatas, spamear y no echar gota. Ahora decenas de incendios provocados están reduciendo cientos de hectáreas a cenizas y los bomberos, maltratados por estos partidos fascistas, no dan abasto, porque con esta calor es casi imposible extinguir el fuego. Millones de vidas perdidas, quemadas y sufriendo una agonía indescriptible hasta la muerte. Si eso no es un crimen, no es que lo ser. Nos vamos a quedar sin nada, y todo por culpa de un puao de malnacidos abyectos y execrables que no merecen ni el aire que respiran. Story 85. Public health, housing bubble, food shortage, water shortage, the decline of Western public education, and the loss of all our old infrastructure. Story 86. Healthcare system collapse. In a lot of countries, it's underfunded, workers are burnt out, and populations are aging fast. That's not sustainable. Story 87. 28-year commercial trades guy here. I'm certain the ProPress plumbing crimp fittings with the 50-year life expectancy, O-ring, will start to collectively fail like dominoes, costing trillions in renovations to repair. Story 88. Literally the USA. Like we are one bad incident away from martial law and even civil war at this point, with how this admin is illegally carrying on. Story 89. There's a lot here, scrolled for a while without seeing the environment. It encompasses many issues, all of which need attention. Fresh water, global warming, garbage, all of it. Story 90. Increases in global temperature until biomes are thrown so out of whack it just gets hotter exponentially faster. The beginning of wars for food and water that end in authoritarianism in most places. WW3 soon after. Probably. Honestly, I really feel like we have set ourselves up to fail by never paying attention to sustainability. Profits. Life. If we were planning on fixing any of it, the world would be a much different place by now. Story 91. Climate change. We're not doing remotely enough to curb it, despite already doing a lot. Mass food insecurity, shortage of medicine, and a steep increase in refugees and weather extreme-related deaths and damage seems inevitable. WW3 also seems inevitable. Story 92. Automating easy tasks in highly technical roles. Companies. This is how a new grad engineer, technician, etc. learns the basics to what they're supposed to become an expert in. If they miss out on that, what happens when shit hits the fan and then something at that basic level needs to be fixed? But all the experienced guys have retired. Story 93. The loneliness epidemic and the population pyramid collapses are positioned to cause an absolute disaster if we don't do anything about it. Pair this with the fact that no one is fighting the AI encroachment correctly, and it could end up even worse. AI encroachment needs to be fought with things like UBI and taxing AI technology usage. Not simply trying to say, don't use AI. That has never and will never work. At best, it would delay things, which would be worse since eventually the possibilities will be too great and it'll hit like a tsunami. Story 94. Climate, AI, and water shortages are on a collision course, with the two former increasingly influencing the third. Story 95. WW3. Some could argue that with all the smaller-scale conflicts already taking place, it's already started. Story 96. First one. World War III. It's not as about if, but about when. The world hasn't been less peaceful since World War II. That's not the big problem. These are the hallmarks we are close to WW3. 1. We see a greater military spending in more states now than before. 2. It's the democratic states against dictators. USA versus China. Ukraine versus Russia. Israel versus Iran. These three dictators are funding terrorist organizations, shadow organizations, and other organizations and individuals to fight for them in other states, destabilize systems and organizations like political parties and president candidates, and influence elections for their own win. What Israel did to Iran back in June was necessary not only for themselves but for democracies in Europe too. Iran is Russia's ally and is gladly to take down Israel while Russia attacks Europe. 3. The scramble for the Arctic, Trump's Greenland ideas and so on, were not all madness. It was about strategy. China is more and more invested in the Arctic than ever before. We don't know why they are so possessed in the society, but this autumn a record amount of Chinese citizens got applied for border schools in Norway. Story 97. I heard something in a podcast not so long ago, and I thought it was pretty accurate. The right to disconnect will become a luxury. I don't mean disconnection, of course, being cut off from the networks, but also from all the advertising that floods us. Story 98. Pensions. Everyone talks about a secure future, but we are practically paying for a ticket for a concert that will have been canceled 30 years before. Story 99. Water shortages in the U.S. and the resulting legal shitstorm that will follow. The U.S. Southwest is in for a rude awakening, and they seem to think that the rest of the country, and namely the Midwest, is going to save them, and that is neither legally or logistically feasible. You guys chose to live somewhere that cannot sustain a population on its own. Now you get to live with those choices. Story 100. I work in sales and AI is getting to the point to be so sophisticated you can't trust anything anymore that isn't in person. Even live over Zoom is getting to the point that people can't trust that anymore. Easy enough to tell what is fake right now, but in a few years that could change. I think the result of this will be almost all B2B sales work is going to revert back to being mostly in person, as opposed to being done over the phone, email, Zoom. Story 101. American infrastructure, specifically our build-wide strategy, has relied on the idea that car ranges will only increase over time. I have an unsubstantiated hunch that EVs, while inevitable in replacing gas cars, aren't going to match or exceed the ranges of gas cars, and the model EVs that can travel 400 miles one way will be sold at luxury price points. If this happens, people's willingness to travel is going to decrease alongside the range. Trips to the grocery will still occur, maybe trips around 50 miles one way, from Dayton, to Cincinnati, for example. But a trip from Dayton to Indianapolis or Cleveland is going to be a hard sell, now that charging has entered the equation. State-level funding for mass transit infrastructure will have to increase if cities want to continue seeing new travelers' growth spending. If any of this should come to pass, rural towns outside of any quote-unquote greater metro area or the mass transit corridor would likely stand to suffer the worst from this, as what happened to the coal and train towns of West Virginia will happen again, only at a greater scale. That could be the ticking time bomb. Edit, clarity. Story 102. Plastic pollution. The whole thing about microplastics in our blood already. Who knows what the long-term effects of it will be? Story 103. Just listen when the night sets in. No birds are singing because no insects are flying to feed them. The insect apocalypse is already happening right before our eyes for more than 20 years without anyone taking notice. Story 104. Easy answer. The stock market. These CEOs are making horrible decisions for their businesses and their investors. At least in the US, I work for Lowe's. Tools like Craftsman, DeWalt, and Cobalt are continuously being made with lower quality. Story 105. I need to get out more often. How can I not know the housing market is a ticking time bomb and can explode in my lifetime? The only thing I am expecting is Jesus to return. Amen. Story 106. Dude, look around, pick one. We are at the center of a global shitstorm, and all government can do is fling poo. Story 107. The national debt. It's as bad for this nation as any individual you might know who is in debt up to their ears with no way to pay it down. $37 trillion is an unfathomable amount of debt, and this country borrows more every year just to keep itself running. Story 108. This will end one of two ways. People will revolt against the corporate billionaire class, or they will meekly accept their reality, which will encourage the corporate billionaire class to be even more abusive. Story 109. Islamization in Germany and population replacement in Europe will blow up in our faces. Israel is already showing us what is inevitable. Story 110. The discovery of alien life. I don't think we could possibly be alone out there. And I think as our telescopes continue to get more advanced, scientists will eventually discover proof of other life in the cosmos within the next few decades. The real question is whether we will be visited by other life forms, or if we already have. I think that's something it's harder to make a guess regarding, because they would have to be extremely advanced to travel many light years to reach us. Answer. I'm sure life exists elsewhere in the universe, but between the stellar habitable zone, the galactic habitable zone, the non-existent habitability of red dwarf systems, the ridiculously enormous distance between stars, and the high levels of radiation outside of a star's heliosphere, it's a safe bet that we'll never detect alien life. Alien life will never visit our planet and will never leave the solar system. Story 111. Civil unrest in the U.S. between the haves and have-nots, followed by a social democracy. The reason why France became a social democracy is because the haves went too far, and the have-nots started cutting their fudge heads off. Once the scales tip too far, it'll be all on. We've seen it in many countries. Story 112. A number of countries facing economic collapse due to population crisis. First ones to come to mind are South Korea, Japan, and Italy. Close to all first world countries are below replacement numbers, which is seriously worrying. Yet the ones I've mentioned are in a borderline unrecoverable state and are facing almost guaranteed collapse if swift and effective action isn't taken. Yet the fact they have been some of the very worst countries for decades strongly suggests that such change will not take place. Story 113. Yellowstone, the supervolcano erupting. There is concerning reports of animals mass migrating out of the area for no discernible reason. The last thing America needs is 1,000 atomic bombs going off at the same moment, which has been estimated for its release of that much energy. Story 114. It's happening now. Remember that massive push both industry and higher education have been evangelizing since the 1990s regarding programming? That line that the world can't have enough coders? The belief it's critical to get a computer science degree. So feel free to run up hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt because all the big money programming jobs are just waiting for you? That was bullshit, and AI is the final nail in the coffin on that career track. Story 115. Conflict between those that own the means of production, wealthy, stock-owning class, and those that don't. Story 116. Dating and gender politics. Giving everyone access to a worldwide dating market where only the top 10 to 20 of men are selected as an intimacy mate is going to have massive societal impact, and it has already started. Men and women are pissed at each other. Men are giving up, and historically when women only choose the elite men, it is usually followed by extreme social unrest. Birth rates are below replacement level, which will affect retirement and social security for the elderly, and will cause the economy to stagnate. This is why governments are going after abortion and adult content. They are the writing on the wall and are panicking. Story 117. The Yellowstone caldera, quite literally, exploding and covering.